Hey y'all, it's Justin Moore here. Thanks for tuning in to the Appalachian Psychedelic Society podcast. Today's guest, we have Jessica Allen, who has her master's in social work. She's from Appalachian, Kentucky. This is a brief conversation with Jessica, who is going to be a speaker at our upcoming virtual town hall on February 3rd, 2026. Coming back to myself, addiction, Ibogaine, and hope in Appalachia. I'm super excited to hear more from Jessica at the town hall. I'm honored and excited to bring you all her voice for this brief conversation about those things, about addiction, Ibogaine, Appalachia. Where do these things intersect? What do we need to know about? What is happening with this medicine, and how has it affected people's lives? This is an extremely important conversation as Ibogaine finds its way through the legislation in the United States. We have a lot to talk about, and if you find this conversation interesting, consider joining us at the town hall. You can find the link to attend and register through our KIT subscription. KIT subscribers also receive the 2025 policy report as well as what to look for in 2026. We cover all 13 states in Appalachia and their current policy landscape regarding psychedelics. We have also built a historical timeline of Appalachia and psychedelics. All KIT subscribers receive both of those as well as attendance for the town hall. Thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for helping to contribute to making this work sustainable. Without further ado, here's Jessica Allen. When I first met you a while back, you told me briefly about a book that you had read that had, I don't know if it was the first time you discovered Ibogaine, but in the back it had like a phone number. Can you share with me about that book, that story of discovering the book and kind of what happened?
Yeah, it was totally by chance. My father was given that book at a Gatewood Galbraith political rally. A stranger handed him that book, and this was in the midst of really the height of my addiction. So someone just put it in his hands, and it's called The Last Free Man in America. And it has a picture of Gatewood Galbraith with an AK-47 in the front of the book. And Dad read it. And one of the chapters in that book is about addiction and the limitations of traditional treatment, and about Ibogaine specifically and its effectiveness in treating opioid addiction. And there was a phone number in that book, and my dad called that phone number and connected with a real person. And a week later, I was in Mexico.
So your dad had some openness to this. You didn't
He
have
did.
to convince him or hear about it and kind of fight any stigma. He saw it as a pathway for supporting you, or what was?
Yeah. At that point, I'd been to quite a few traditional treatment centers. I had tried Suboxone. None of those things had been effective. I would relapse typically the day I left treatment or within 2 weeks. So we were all feeling pretty hopeless. And dad was a hippie. Dad grew up in the 60s and 70s. He had had his own psychedelic experiences, recreational in nature, but still that he regarded as beneficial and therapeutic and impactful on his life. So he read about this and he did some research, and I just remember him saying to me, "This sounds so crazy that it just might work." And he was totally open to it. I was just like, "Will you try this?" And I said, "Sure." I had really no expectation it would work. I was very fearful that I was going to end up in Mexico in withdrawal. And, I was like, well, I guess I can just go to a pharmacy there if that happens. And then I also had heard it could be dangerous. And I was so depressed going down there. I thought maybe it'll kill me. And that'll be great. I'm okay with that if it does. That's kind of how dark of a place I was in before going down there.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a really tough place to be in. I think a lot of people can relate with having been there. What year was this
It was 2008, Christmas Eve, 2008.
when you went down?
Yeah.
So you went down on Christmas Eve.
Yeah.
So what did Santa give you for Christmas?
I actually saw Santa in my trip
Really?
for yeah,
Did you take the medicine on Christmas Day?
Christmas Eve and then going into Christmas Day. I actually took my medicine in the evening. So they kind of timed it, to when I was going into withdrawal, very early withdrawal. And then you take your first small dose just to make sure there's no allergic reaction, anything like that. Then you take the flood dose and you lay down. And my experience went through the night. So, yes, I woke up on Christmas Day really with no addiction. It was just kind of gone. No withdrawal, no cravings, didn't want a cigarette. I wanted a banana and to call my mom. And I felt good. I felt at peace. I didn't feel guilt, shame. I just felt grateful.
Reminds me that it's somewhat of the experience of Howard Lotsoff, who 1950s had that experience unintentionally,
Yeah.
was a heroin addict, and then tried this, and then woke up and was like, wait a minute, I don't want heroin
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah. It was such a profound change to wake up. I mean, for years, my first thought waking up was, do I have any drugs left? And if not, do I have money? How am I going to get money? And where's my drug dealer? I mean, that was it every single day. So to wake up and be like, I'd really like some breakfast and, call my mom. And that was just like, and that felt normal. That felt natural. It's like such a change.
So you go down to Mexico on Christmas Eve, you take this medicine in the evening into Christmas Day. Do you stay for a few more days and then come back, or?
Yep. So I think I stayed down there a total about 2 weeks. They had two houses. So they had the treatment house, and then they had another house that was kind of just like aftercare integration. There wasn't any program. It was kind of just like you can hang out here if you want to, nobody's going to hurt you. You're safe here, and just kind of take it all in. So that's what I did. And then I returned home.
Right. And so, yeah, tell me about coming home. Where were you living when you came home?
I was living with my parents. So that's Betsy Lane, Kentucky, tiny little town close to Pikeville. So I came back here, and was just back with my family and actually stayed sober, stayed clean for 2 years after that experience, which was pretty miraculous until 2010. And in 2010, I did relapse, major relapse after a really profound loss. And then I took Ibogaine again.
So I'm curious kind of about, those initial weeks coming back. Sounds like you came back to a family that was at least supportive or understanding, and like, there wasn't judgment around, oh, you went down and took a psychedelic. You came home to tell us about your experience, or what exactly
Yeah, my dad,
supportive was it to, yeah.
extremely supportive. My mom and dad were so different. Dad was a geologist, reformed hippie. And then there was my mom, who was very conservative Christian, never smoked a cigarette, never been drunk, never touched a drug. And somehow those two came together and got married. But they were so supportive. I think with my mom, before I went down, before we agreed that I was going to do this, what made it okay with her was the fact that it was a natural medicine. And she actually connected that to her faith. She was like, she viewed it as God saving me, like this grows from the ground. You know what I mean? Like this grows from the ground. And if this can save my daughter, that's wonderful. And dad was less religious than mom, but very spiritual. And I think he just felt like he related it more to kind of his psychedelic experiences and what they'd done for him, and just felt that this would be healing for me. And I think he believed in this actually much more than he believed in any of the other treatments that we tried. We did those treatments because we didn't know about Ibogaine. And if you talk to a professional, they're going to be like, all right, 12-step rehab, 90-day minimum, you have a brain disease. And I think dad just felt like this would be more of a breakthrough experience for me. And it was. But coming back, dad was curious. He's like, what was it like? Just straight away. I came home to a lot of support.
And what about, were you around folks that you used with prior to that? And what was that internal experience like, if so?
That was a really challenging aspect of it. I was ready to put my addiction behind me. I wasn't quite ready to end all my relationships. And a lot of those relationships were built on addiction. They were not healthy relationships. And I'd been using for some time before I took Ibogaine. So there was a real divide in how do I occupy myself? What do I do with myself? Who are my friends now? And that was a struggle. So I still spent time with people who were using, which wasn't smart, but it took me a while to come to the conclusion on my own that I really have to, just because I feel better and just because I don't have cravings right now, I can't keep putting myself in these situations.
Do you
So that
feel
was challenging.
sure? Do you feel like Ibogaine, I mean, so it took the cravings away. And do you feel like there was a memory of the experience or a presence of the medicine that stayed with you that was helpful in those times where, okay, I'm around these people, or a time that you felt tempted to use? How did Ibogaine influence that temptation to use during that 2 years of sobriety?
So part of my Ibogaine experience when I was actually under the influence in Mexico was, and still to this day, one of the most profound experiences I ever had. And it was living through my own funeral. And in that experience, I went through the whole past life viewing, which is kind of standard Ibogaine if you get that experience. And then I moved into what seemed like my future. And I saw my family at a funeral home. And initially, I didn't know. I was just like, okay, here's a funeral. And I realized that it was my funeral. And I was there in a casket and I was experiencing my funeral through my mother's eyes, and I felt her grief. I mean, it's like I was my mother, and I was literally physically painful. It just felt so awful, so just deep. And I thought of that a lot, when I would feel tempted or try to tell myself, well, I can probably do this. I feel so good now. I'm not physically dependent anymore. I could probably get away with it a few times. I thought of my mom and that pain.
That's interesting. In psychedelics, we talk about the neuroplasticity. We talk about these new neural pathways, and that feels like a concrete example of it. And when you're in active addiction, it's just like those lanes are blocked. The thinking of those other people, it's like it just doesn't even exist when you're in active addiction.
Yeah.
That memory, emotion, compassion, empathy, like it's blocked.
Yeah, it's gone.
It's gone, right? And so for you, after Ibogaine, it just opened up that pathway.
Yeah. I was, even after I relapsed, I still came back to that. And that's ultimately what helped me get sober again. But it did open that back up because I think of kind of my life before Ibogaine and after Ibogaine, especially in terms of my thinking. And I didn't think of that at all when I was using before. I was so selfish in my addiction that I believed, kind of screw everybody. I'm only hurting myself. Why do they care? That's how crazy addiction had me thinking. I never took into consideration. Even my dad told me, pleaded with me, "Jessica, you're killing your mother." It's like I couldn't hear it.
Yeah.
He could say it, I could hear it, but it was hollow. There was nothing. I had just tunnel vision.
Yeah. I mean, that's the active addiction affecting that executive functioning in the brain. And it's reminded me of the hungry ghost, about
Mhm.
the hungry ghost, that comes from Buddhism, but also it's got titled one of Gabor Mate's book in the realm of hungry ghosts. And that in active addiction, there's just this constant consuming of, really anything. It can be the DOC, but it could also be anything else as well, where there's a constant consuming of something that feels like nourishment, but it's never actually nourishing, right? It just kind of
Yeah,
goes through, which also makes me think about the soul, right? And how that title, that word is in the culture in the United States, but doesn't have a whole lot of context for some of us. Maybe here
yeah.
in Appalachia, right? We use that word when we think about soul food, or we think about, uh,
Music.
right, that music has soul. But I wonder if, yeah, if Ibogaine, influence your concept of soul, or, your relationship to what you think that is, or know that is, or anything like that.
Definitely. So, when I went down to Mexico initially in 2008, you could really say I had no soul or very little awareness. I knew the concept. I grew up in a pretty religious family, a very God driven family, especially on my mother's side. So I'd been raised with those ideas, but I had no connection to my own personal relationship with that. And I didn't have any relationship or understanding or awareness of all the things around me and how my interactions with all the things around me impacted those things. I was just a person, a standalone human, and my actions only impacted me. And I began completely changed that thinking. And it also reconnected me with my spirituality. When I arrived in Mexico, I'd reached a point that I would say I do not believe in God. If there is a God, I don't want anything to do with it. I was in a really dark place. I didn't want it. I didn't believe in it. I was angry with it. I attributed my own failures to that. I was like, well, if that's real, then I hate it because look at me. And it connected me back to God. I had an experience in that trip where I thought I was dying. And I knew that Ibogaine could, result in a fatal heart arrhythmia. And I was like, this is happening. So the constant through my experience was my heartbeat. The Ibogaine experience is insane. You see things, you hear things, you feel things. There's a lot going on while you're laying completely still with your eyes closed. There's a lot going on. And the constant had been my heartbeat. So all of a sudden, it was actually after the funeral experience, my heartbeat stopped, or my perception of my heartbeat stopped, and I couldn't see. Like everything was black and silent. I tried to open my eyes, nothing. I mean, it was truly black. And I was like, I'm dying. And it's funny because I came down there saying, well, if I die, this will be a relief. This will be good. And I remember in that moment when I was truly felt that I was confronted with death, I just remember thinking, please, God, don't let me die. And I was just like frantic, panicked, wanted to fight for my life, but couldn't move, couldn't see, couldn't hear. And the moment I had that thought, everything just turned back on, and I felt gratitude and relief. And I don't think I felt gratitude in years prior to that.
Hmm.
So I never, even after relapse, never found myself in a place again where I denied a higher power or my spirituality. I never separated from it again.
Thanks for sharing that. So you had your mom who had seen this as kind of God's medicine, right? If
Yeah,
God put it on this planet, then it's for people and God has an intention for this. And for you, you kind of went down with almost kind of atheist agnostic view of it and a blaming of it. And yet through the experience that you've just described, you felt closer to God that continued? Did you feel the presence of God? Did you talk about God more? Did you use that word more? What did it feel like?
I did. Yeah, it just I don't know, it's just like it turned back on in me, you know? It's like I'd lost that connection completely. There was nothing present there, and it just came back. And I never initially, I referred to it more as spirituality, and then kind of later on, that developed into God, and I actually felt comfort from that. It didn't I was very cynical about it before, you know, like, "Oh, yeah, sure, God saved you," you know, I mean, I was awful, I was very dark, but yeah, it made me feel good and hopeful to be able to not only acknowledge God, but to actually feel God's presence, and that came back through which makes sense, you know, because if you do take that stance that it is a medicine created by God, put on the earth by God, and that kind of restores you, to that place. So to me, it just made a lot of sense.
Yeah, I know that this is not a shared belief amongst all Christians and people that follow and believe in God. But yet, it's also a fairly common experience for different psychedelics. I had that experience with ayahuasca myself, coming into it more atheist agnostic, kind of indifferent to it, and then leaving with and sustaining that since my first experience that I use that word more. I pray at dinner and I feel a relationship to faith communities. What have you encountered in any faith community or any religious or spiritual communities in bringing this up? Have you faced any judgment or just confusion or
Definitely some confusion.
yeah.
You know, like, "You did what?" But I've encountered more just, an interest, a curiosity amongst people, and I can say, especially in Southern Appalachia, a lot of people shared my mom's viewpoint, you know, like, God made it, you know? And I think that made people more trusting, surprisingly to me, you know, because it's like, well, this is hardcore Southern Appalachian Christians, they're gonna think this is, you know, the devil. But it was quite the opposite. People viewed it as a blessing, you know, a gift from God. And we're very open. I've talked to a lot of very traditional families about their own struggles with addiction, and some of them have sent their kids to take Ibogaine. So there was a surprising openness to it.
So you've talked with people who have sent their kids.
Mhm.
How old were their was it their adult children, I'm assuming?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
20s, early 30s, you know, they had been through the same experience. They had done 12 steps, they'd done traditional rehab, ended up most of them, you know, dependent on methadone or Suboxone. And while that is, you know, a valid and oftentimes beneficial harm reduction treatment, you're still addicted. And I think a lot of people just wanted to end that dependence eventually.
Yeah. So in your experience, you're finding in Southern Appalachia, there's been some more openness.
Yes.
You've had support coming from the family side and even influence for people and information for others who have tried traditional treatments, have tried 12 steps and recovery.
I think Colorado has a natural medicine commission starting up. I think they're probably the more advanced after Texas in what they're doing. Kentucky has a bill that's been filed. It's not progressed so far. So, given the time, I don't know that it will this session, but it picked up 4 additional sponsors 4 additional Republican sponsors. It's interesting that this has been led entirely by Republicans, but there's 5 sponsors on that bill now, but it hasn't got a vote. It may not. There's certainly support. We've talked to a lot of senators and they express willingness to it, but there's also, there's a lot of resistance too. So it might be slower here. West Virginia, made it through the House with flying colors. Mississippi's dead in the Senate. West Virginia is not dead. So it might make it in West Virginia. And I think we'll keep seeing this. New Jersey has their psilocybin pilot program. So I think we're seeing a general openness to these medicines on a state level. Federally, I don't know. It's like 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. And I think that's how it will play out for a few years.
Yeah, you have the political realities of legislators who have legitimate concerns for their constituents. And as advocates, there's a tall order, right, to prepare for the many conversations that come after saying, hey, we want to legalize this in some way or another. Americans for Ibogaine has taken that medical research route, right? So, yeah, I saw that West Virginia went through 96.0 recently.
Yeah.
Beginning of
Yeah.
2026. So there's a lot on the horizon. Well, we're going to stall this conversation for now. This has been super interesting to hear from Miss Jessica Allen from Appalachian, Kentucky. On February 23rd, we are going to have Jessica speaking with us for Hollers and Horizons Town Hall. We'd love to see y'all there. You can check out the links in the description and come see more of this conversation. There is a lot more to talk about, and we will do that in the town hall. Otherwise, thanks for stopping by.
Thanks.